I'm John Rodgers from Cuyahoga Falls, and this program is about pushing west, the Santa Fe Trail and the Pony Express. And here is the Santa Fe Trail because that's the one we're going to cover first. I'll go into the details of it as we pick up the trail and go on. Large wagons rolled westward out of Missouri on the Santa Fe Trail. But unlike the pioneer trails, wagons also rolled eastward, for trade moved both ways on this trail of commerce, and you did indeed plan on coming back home. Of course, not all wagons made it both ways, because the wear and tear on people, animals, and especially wagons was very great on this 900 to 1,000-mile trail. 8 weeks was required to go one way, and the difficulties and dangers were very real. And after you were out on the trail, you knew that it wasn't just business, it was a slice of life, a new and vastly different experience. And for 60 years, 1821 through 1880, the Santa Fe Trail was a vitally important part in the development of the southwestern part of the United States. And how did this historic trail come into being, the Santa Fe Trail? Simply put, William Becknell of Old Franklin, Missouri was in debt almost to the point of bankruptcy and was therefore facing a jail term. This was the site of Old Franklin on the far side of the great Missouri River. He packed goods and headed to Santa Fe where he sold them, turning a profit in the process. And this is down at the square in Santa Fe. Becknell saw the need to use wagons to carry many more goods for greater profit, and he also saw that wagons could go on what we now call the Cimarron Cutoff, and cut off a few miles. Becknell had gone to Santa Fe using more or less a trail later called the mountain route. The cutoff was actually the first real route, and Becknell's first return trip was by way of that cutoff. The mountain route would be used later when the lack of water, the Indian attacks, and the Mexican situation made it seem more favorable. You're going to see some close-ups of some of the pictures on this map as we go on through. And here's some of the great grasslands out in the western United States. Even though Lieutenant Zebulon Pike, this is the one who named Pike's Peak, or who it's named for, had labeled the 600 prairie miles the Great American Desert, goods could be supplied cheaper across the plains into Santa Fe than by any other means. Manufactured goods were in the United States, and they were wanted by people in New Mexico. Even back then, under Spanish control, the area was known by that name, New Mexico. And this is some of the high plains. And I'll show you later on as we get further along. But this is the trail coming across there. A lot of times the trail will be in swales, not in actual ruts. And the Spanish rule was that the whole area had to trade with Spanish merchants only. That changed in the very first year because Mexico won independence from Spain in 1821, sorry. There simply were no great geographic barriers to the United States and New Mexico developing trade, and that's exactly what happened. Missouri and New Mexico were being joined through economic interdependence, trading and financial, and through marriages. You'll see these in a number of places. These fence posts, stone fence posts, are used to mark the trail. There's one, and there's one off in the distance. These particular ones are over in Kansas. You couldn't use rivers for this trade, and the river is going to be the Arkansas River. But these are some pictures in between of what they think things looked like at that time. But this is the Arkansas River today. So you couldn't use rivers for this trade because they were too small and unpredictable. But you had to stay close to rivers for water, and you had to use wagons to carry your goods. Whether you use mules or oxen to pull those wagons was a continuing argument. This one taken from that map uses mules. And this one from another map uses oxen. Staying near those rivers had a distinct drawback. You had to cross a lot of tributaries of those rivers. And just after a storm, the tributaries could be much more difficult to cross. Here's one that you will see again. This one, it was difficult to cross at any time, and especially after a storm. So you quickly learn to cross before you bedded down for the night in case of a storm during the night. This is depicting Buena Vista during the Mexican-American War, because I'm going to say a few words about it. Until the Mexican-American War, the trail continued as a path of commerce. Then, besides the commercial usage of the trail during the Mexican-American War, and that was 1846 to 1848, it served also as a military road. Alexander Majors was the primary military shipper on the trail from 1848 to the start of the Civil War. His name would come up later as part of the group that started the Pony Express. So I have moved you up onto the Pony Express because that's the only place I've ever seen this map of that particular activity, which we're going to cover later. After the Mexican-American War, military supplies were in continual movement across the trail, heading in many cases for Fort Union in New Mexico. Stagecoaches, which you're looking at, and mail coaches were still regular users of the trail, and commerce continued. But Army freight from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and I am on the banks of the Missouri River in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, taking this picture. But the Army freight moved from there over to Fort Union, all the way down in New Mexico, and that became, the Army freight became the major trail traffic. Santa Fe Trail was involved with making money. Trade dollars went up from about $15,000 in 1822 to $3.5 million in 1860. And somebody has figured that that's about 53 million in today's dollars. This is Bent's old fort that you're seeing over in Colorado. Most of the people handling the trade and a number of people actually on the trail understood the business of the trail. They knew what profit was and how to keep the bottom line black. And this old man with his donkeys is doing a trail just using them as pack animals with no wagon. You didn't make as much money that way, but if you didn't have the money to buy the wagon in the first place, I guess that's what happened. This is a diorama at Fort Leavenworth. Many aspects of the trail are historically interesting, but those who wrote about their experiences wrote about the trail itself. They wrote about the route, the daily routine, hardships, dangers, and the thrill and satisfaction of the completion of a trip. And since the trail was the thing that remained in their memory, let us also go over the trail. This is a National Park Service map, and this is the first we're going to see. Right up in here, right by Boonville, is where Mr. Becknell started and came across, he crossed the Missouri River and got on the Independence side. And then for many years, Independence was considered the start of the Santa Fe Trail, and it moved over into Kansas City later on. That's not much of a distance, but anyhow, it was an actual movement of the starting of the trail, and then came on down this way, and this is the line here between Missouri and Kansas. So let's go back to Mr. Becknell. That was in 1821. Mr. Becknell was born in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, and he started the first full trip on the Santa Fe Trail at Franklin on the north side of the Missouri River, near the present town of Boonville, Missouri. Floods have destroyed the town of Old Franklin, and no wagons were involved on this first trip. There's the mighty Missouri at Old Franklin, and going over the far side of it, this is the site of Old Franklin. And then you're going to see this marker several times, and that is the new marker for the Santa Fe Trail. Boone's Lick is quite close to the trail, and it's a site where Daniel Boone's sons had produced salt before commerce on the trail began. And that same William Becknell, he's a busy man, he'd also extracted salt at Boone's Lick. And that's a trail marker right there, and here is the Missouri again. The trail crossed the Missouri River and made its way over to Independence, Missouri. Later, on this eastern end of the trail, the Missouri River was used to make the starting point of the trail further west at Independence, Missouri. Now you had moved your goods, perhaps from St. Louis, by the Missouri River to the new start of the Santa Fe Trail. Now, on the west end of the Jackson County Courthouse in Independence, Missouri, are two markers. Now, the west end would be that end over there. These two markers are the start of the Santa Fe Trail. Well, let me hold that for a minute. And this is what the town of Independence looked like when the trail was active, both the Oregon Trail and the Santa Fe Trail. The Santa Fe Trail started in 1832, and the start of the Oregon Trail was 1843. And here's a stone at the west end of the Jackson County Courthouse, Santa Fe Trail. And just about 20 feet away, here the Oregon Trail began. And this is the same courthouse where Harry Truman got his political start. And here's the walking statue of Mr. Truman. Now, by 1856, I had said that the starting point moved a bit west, and it moved to Westport Landing in Kansas City, Missouri. And here's a whole old map, an old picture of what that looked like at that time. Now I'm going to take you on out into to Kansas, and these are the beautiful Flint Hills. Even though the Santa Fe Trail was a commercial trail, its users still had the problem of starting time. You needed green grass for your draft animals, but you wanted to be ahead of your competitor. It's dry along the route, especially in the high plains where I have you now, but it does sometimes rain, usually as part of a rather violent storm complete with lightning. And rain means mud, which means with heavy wagons a certain number of wheels sunk down to the axles. In addition, many draft animals were very unruly for a period at the start of each trip. And here you might want to go with your oxen instead of your mules, but that's only for a fairly short part of the trip. Now, those storms and lightning could also have a detrimental effect on people and stock. Well, this is the unruly guys. Let's go on to the fire. And if the lightning or Indians had set a prairie fire, you might have to cross many miles without forage for your stocks. Now, moving over into present-day Kansas, the town of Olathe is the site of Mahaffey Farmstead. It was active on the trail in the 1850s and 1860s, and remember, that's late in the life of the trail. And it also became a stagecoach stop. This was tall grass prairie country with plants reaching to a height of 12 feet. And this road now, which is the Kansas City Road, this is virtually the spot where the trail went. This is a lot of times as we go out, I'll have a picture of a highway on it, and that will be right where the trail went. Now, you'll see notes and folders and even signs telling about Santa Fe Trail tracks, but they're better seen further west. Now, we're going to continue on west. We're down on this trail here, and we're going to see we cross the road. Sometimes you can't go right with the track. Right back in here, we were following the trail exactly when we were on. Now we had to jog down here, but we will cross it again. And we keep doing that as we make our way across. So continuing west, the separation of the Santa Fe Trail and the Oregon Trail occurred just beyond the town of Gardner, Kansas. Just out in this area. And here is a little bit more. That sign, which I have turned it so you can't read it, it's right in this area that the Oregon Trail went up this way and the Santa Fe Trail came this way over and went on to the west. Remember that the Santa Fe Trail was in use 20 years before the Oregon Trail. Now, we're using Route 56 to follow this portion of the trail, and that's going to lead us into Council Grove, across the Neosha River. Now, some more prairies. This is still Flint Hill stuff. And this is the Neosha River, and I've just crossed into Council Grove. The Neosha River crossing is only about 30 to 50 yards north of Route 56, and because of a hard rock bottom, this crossing was relatively easy. But any river crossing was a source of great danger. Hardwood trees in this area provided about the last chance for spare axles and wagon parts as the trail went west. Council Grove got its name from an 1825 council with the Great and Little Osage Indians. A treaty allowed the passage of trail travelers through Osage County. The old oak tree under which the council was held fell in 1958, but part of it has been preserved, and you are looking at it. Now, there's another old tree called the post office tree that's in among those flowers there, and that sign is about it. This one was used as a cache for mail along the trail from 1825 to 1847. You would simply put the mail that you wanted somebody else to pick up in the opening in the tree trunk. The old Hayes House from the late 1850s is now a restaurant. Pretty good when I've eaten in there. And the Cottage Grove Hotel is still used, but it was being built in the 1870s, and that means it was only there for about the last decade of traffic on the trail, and I've stayed there also. Most of the Madonna of the Trail statues are along the old National Road, that's US Route 40, but the Daughters of the American Revolution put one here in 1928. Now, moving further west, we find shortgrass prairie, and by Long Springs, we cross the trail and find a marker. A day that did not exist during the active time of the trail. To name a few, grain elevators, bridges like this one crossing streams, oil wells, and a highway. And that highway, believe me, is controlled at times by wheat combines. And you're trying to get past. The crossing marker east of McPherson in this shortgrass prairie country is a bit more elaborate than some we've seen. Quite a bit of the highway runs here right through where the old trail ran. And now here's the red, and we're going to continue on down this way, and we'll just keep on going, heading west. Cow Creek Crossing was usually a difficult crossing because of the stream bed. Well, I still have you out on the highway, and that is still the trail, and let's go into Cow Creek. There's this little shelter, a little picnic shelter there, and here is what the stream bed looks like. Whoops, I'm sorry, a sign for you to read. Cow Creek Crossing. There was actually an engagement here many years ago on the Santa Fe Trail, and here's Cow Creek itself. Now, this was a difficult one. The banks don't slope down to the water. It's about a mile south of the highway on a little dirt road. And Pawnee Rock is a prairie town of 400 people with the Santa Fe Trail landmark about 1 mile north of town, and that is Pawnee Rock. This was prime buffalo feeding grounds, and there were many battles in the area between Indian tribes. And that is a beautiful field of wheat stretching out in front of you. Pawnee Rock was a campground area, and wagon trains circled around in the area at night for protection, as many as 200 wagons at a time. It was used as a place to inscribe your name back as early as 1825. But because the rock was removed for buildings, all of the names are gone. I couldn't find a single one. The Arkansas River is about 3 miles south beyond the town. And a mark on the top of Pawnee Rock has these words, in honor of the brave men and women who, passing over the old Santa Fe Trail, endured the hardships of frontier life and blazed the path of civilization for posterity. The Plains Indians who followed the buffalo were the Cheyenne, the Kiowa, the Comanche, the Arapaho, and the Kiowa Apache. The first 3 of these tribes were the ones who carried out most attacks on traffic along the Santa Fe Trail. This is a painting done by Remington, and it depicts a Comanche scout down on this trail. The Indians knew that those wagons carried valuable goods, and the Indians resisted the taking over of their plains by the Americans. This is a Charlie Russell painting of Indians attacking one of the trains. Indeed, after the taking of New Mexico by the United States, the attacks intensified. But it was blue sky thinking that the Indians would keep the plains and the wagon trains would just pass through. The thought process in the United States said manifest destiny, regardless of who owned the land. Some people still think that way today. The town of Launded, Kansas, has 2 places of interest concerning the trail. And this is a little schoolhouse on the property of Santa Fe Trail Center. This has displays inside and outside, paintings, lots of information, and a windmill that, like, I had never seen before, a real strange one. And the second thing that's in Launded is Fort Launded on the Pawnee River. It was built in 1859, fairly late in the use of the trail, but that's when it was built. Its first purpose was to protect the mail coaches, 1 per week, traveling from Independence, Missouri to Santa Fe. And here's the flag at Old Fort Launded. You can go all through this. It's administered by the National Park Service. This fort was active until 1878 as one of the major Army posts guarding travelers from the Plains Indians. And this little pathway here, which is paved now, right by that lone tree, that is more or less the route of the Santa Fe Trail as it came by Fort Launded. And I'm out in what is known as the parade grounds, and this is a commissary's post right here. And this is inside some of the things that were for sale there. And then finally, some of the barracks. Now there's a 40-acre tract of virgin prairie close by. Since the Santa Fe Trail went right through it, and here's the little swale where it went through. Right through there was the Santa Fe Trail. Its owner, Paul Eichmeyer, kept it in its original state. This land that you're looking at has never known the plow. It's now handled by the staff at the fort. The railroad reached Launded in 1870. 2 trail routes left this area, a wet route and a dry route. They would meet again at Fort Dodge. The dry route was closer, but the wet route provided water. Now, while we're at Fort Launded, mention of buffalo soldiers is appropriate. These were black soldiers, and many served in the 9th and 10th Cavalry, some right here at Fort Launded. But they were organized in 1866 at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and I have taken you back there momentarily. And it's a wonderful memorial that's found there to honor them. This whole area that you're seeing, and I'll give you a close-up of the statue right now. Not quite. You can punch these things and you will hear Colin Powell telling you all about the Buffalo Soldiers. He was the one that he was one of the ones instrumental in getting this wonderful memorial there. And then here should be the statue. The Buffalo Soldiers served in the Indian Wars, Yes, they fought the Indians too. The war with Spain and others up to World War II, they were inactivated. That's somebody else's word, not mine. In North Africa in 1949, 8 Medal of Honor recipients are in their number. Now we'll move back out. And this is a Charlie Russell Indian attack picture. You've seen one pretty close to this one. During all the days up through the Mexican-American War, you had to protect your own wagon train. And this meant that you needed a well-organized and a heavily armed wagon train. Then the Army became responsible for the entire trail, and we've moved over to Frederick Remington's picture of the cavalry. And they built a series of forts. Fort Leavenworth, actually north of the trail, became the eastern anchor, and we've seen that. Incidentally, Fort Leavenworth is where Eisenhower went as part of his development for the crusade in Europe. And he graduated first in a class of 275 from this school that you're looking at. That's just in parentheses. Fort Union, New Mexico, became the western anchor. It was also a quartermaster installation, and it looks like this today. But during the Civil War, most Army personnel were pulled to fight the Confederates, and once again, the Indian raids intensified. Dodge City came into being towards the end of the Santa Fe Trail use when the railroad reached there in 1872. The Chisholm Trail came here between 1875 and 1888. But a lot of things are still happening there, and they involve cattle. This is a painting, but these are actual feedlots. Feedlots to the east of Dodge City indicate that cattle raising and handling is still important here. Now, just on the southeast side of the new Dodge City is this place, which is Fort Dodge. This goes back to 1865. It's a point where the wet route and the dry route met after splitting up by Fort Lauderdale. Today, Fort Dodge is a Kansas State soldier's home. Sutler's store, the one you're looking at, and this house, the Custer House, are two buildings, that's the house over here, are two buildings from that old Fort Dodge. Now, going to the west, away from those feedlots, we enter Dodge City, and what do we see? A stair, a longhorn stair called El Capitan. And then we see Front Street. This was an old rip-roaring place. It's been recreated, and you can even sit there and watch a gunfight if you care to. Part of that museum also includes the site of the old Boot Hill. And here are some of the things that were actually used on the trail. This is one of the hookups for the oxen especially. That's the way you handled them. And then right in Dodge is a battery of grain elevators, very, very large. Now, jumping ahead just a little, but this is the place to really cover it. This is a painting that you're looking at now of buffalo, and let me get you to the head of a bull buffalo that I photographed. Between 1872 and 1874, 3 million buffalo were killed in the Dodge City area. In 1875, at a Texas legislative hearing, General Philip Sheridan, Union Army, Civil War, said, "Buffalo hunters destroy the Indians' commissary. For the sake of lasting peace, let them kill, skin, and sell until they have exterminated the buffalo. Then your prairies will be covered with speckled cattle and the festive cowboy." And these are buffalo hides, and indeed what he suggested was done. You can see the trails west of Dodge City. You can walk out on the high plains to see it, but it really isn't prominent. Let me get you out there. I got to show you a little bit of thistle, a few pictures of that nature. And then here's the a trail painting of what it looked like at that time. This is out in the weather, so it gets a little fuzzy from time to time. And here is what the trail looked like. Just these green swales. See, they're green because they hold water, and that encourages the growth of the plants. And there are several side by side, and that is because the wagons spread out anytime they could, so less people had to eat dust during that day. The Arkansas River was the United States-Spanish border in up until 1821. This is our trail going across here. This is the mountain trail, and this is the Cimarron cutoff here. But the border was right down in here, just below the mountain trail. Well, when you went over here, you were actually in. But down on the Cimarron cutoff, it was most important. The boundary then became the Mexico-United States boundary, 1821, first year of the trail. Later on, it became apparent that staying north of that river had many advantages. Thus, the longer and more difficult but safer mountain route came into being. And we'll follow this mountain route first, using U.S. Route 50. The first sign indicating the split in the trail is at Cimarron, Kansas, where I took this picture. Then further on, about 5 miles to the west, Ingalls, Kansas, a few miles, was also considered a starting point for the Cimarron cutoff. So you can use whichever one you want to. Now, as you go west of Cimarron, Kansas, you get another look at trail tracks, and these are up on a high ridge. These show distinctly that it wasn't just a single track. There are about 4 tracks side by side as you go through here. And then, and here are some of the white poppies that grow out there wild. Then the highway runs almost where the trail ran as we cross over into Colorado. See, we're out in this area now. This is the Arkansas River coming down here and paralleling it. And we have just moved over into Colorado. That map doesn't have it marked very good. John Martin Reservoir is named for a congressman from Colorado. It's south of Hasty, and the dam was completed in 1948 for flood control of the Arkansas River. The trail is on the north side of the reservoir and is marked once more by the Daughters of the American Revolution. And the trail ran right out here. That's the reservoir over there, and the trail ran there. Of course, the reservoir was not there at the time. And here you can see it's dry over here, but where the trail ran through here, the water collects, and so it's a swale. Boggsville, Colorado, is 2 miles south of Los Animas and was founded in 1862. This was a trading point on the mountain route. Kit Carson, while quite young, in 1826, hired on to a wagon train, and in 1867, his last home was right here at Boggsville. Anglo-Spanish and American Indian lived side by side at Boggsville, and this trail sort of, this tree sort of marks the trail. The trail crossed right by that tree. A variety of goods were carried across the trail. From the east, canned or box foods, hardware and tools, books, medicine, ink, candy, clothing, and tobacco were chief among the products. From the west, blankets, dry goods, jewelry, clocks, mirrors, furs, robes, skins, specialty foods were staples. But the most important were raw wool, gold, and silver coming back to the east. Here shows a little of the bargaining going on there. This was at Bent's old fort. Not carried in wagons east, but very important items were donkeys and mules, like that guy. Some of these early Missouri mules really came from Santa Fe. And as to the price of goods, the range might be up to 10 times the purchase price in the location of origin. Bensold Fort is a National Historic Site. It was completed in 1833 to 34, and it served as a private fur trading post for 17 years. Before I forget to tell you, the Arkansas River is in those trees right behind the fort. You can see the tops of them a little bit there. And these rivers are very important for living. It was built, that is, Bensold Fort was built by Charles and William Bent and Sir Anne St. Vrain. Except during the preparation for war with Mexico, it was a trading fort constructed with adobe. Now, adobe is a mixture of clay, water, and sand, and they put straw or wool in it for binding. It was cast into bricks 4 by 9 by 18 inches. And I'm using a National Park Service booklet or pamphlet to show you what the inside is like. Here's what it looks like in my own picture. Buffalo robes and beaver pelts were brought in for trading to get a variety of items. This fort was a cultural crossroads for trappers. Many were French, Plains Indians, Anglo, and Mexicans. This is a buffalo hide, and then a few things for sale. The fort provided a catalyst for change as these diverse people rubbed shoulders in this fort. Peace councils between Indian tribes were held here. And here's some of the beautiful work that is done on wool here by the Indians. I really don't know which Indians it was that did it. These were possible. That is, these councils were possible because of the Bent's relationship with the Indians. Cheyenne and Arapaho could come right into the fort, but other Indians had to use the trading window. English, Spanish, probably some French, and several Indian dialects were spoken in the fort. The fort served people like Colonel Kearney and explorer John Charles Fremont. Workers at the fort came from many places. I have you back to a painting now on the outside of the fort. But the blacksmiths and carpenters were usually Americans from the East. The fort we see today is a reproduction and the drawings and paintings of Lieutenant James Abert in 1846 made it possible. He was sick and had to stay at the fort out of his Army service. And he painted all kinds of things and kept the homes. Charles Bent died in 1847, and St. Vrain tried to sell the fort to the Army unsuccessfully. And it's thought that William Bent may have tried to burn it down after that. How do you burn adobe? I'm not quite sure. Conestoga became a general term for the wagons used on the trail. Many different kinds were actually used. This is a Conestoga, and I have you up at Scotts Bluff now in Nebraska on the Oregon Trail. Many different kinds were actually used. They were often red, white, and blue. Some could carry 3 tons of goods, and they were generally built in St. Louis, Missouri, Michigan, and Indiana. A large wagon had another advantage because in 1839, the Mexican tax in Santa Fe was $500 per wagon, regardless of size. Wagons really took a beating on the trail because as you moved into the shortgrass prairie, the air became drier. Everything made of wood began to shrink, and the wheels broke free of the metal encircling them. And then you had to do this every night. Actually, I have this from a drawing or painting done about the Oregon Trail. At La Junta, still in Colorado, follow U.S. Route 350 towards the southwest, and you're fairly closely following the trail route. At Comanche National Grasslands, where we are, there's a vista overlook where you can see stone posts marking the trail. Here's one right in the foreground here. There are posts like this. And here's one over here, and I can't really see the next one. Now, this is my wife out there, and she is looking at the trail because it's crossing over right in front of her. The Tempest site where we are now, and these grasslands was a stagecoach stop. And then let me get you to Iron Springs. This is where the trail ran. You can really see it all the way across over to the horizon. And here's one of the markers there, and the trail's running across that way. I have you now down at the Iron Springs area. This was a source of water, but the name is an indication of the taste. It really isn't much good. The trail again, you can see another one of the markers out there. The variety of plants and animals was very large over the course of the journey. Vegetation included everything from giant cottonwoods to the smallest prairie flower, and even some cactus thrown in. This one is butterfly weed, which is very pretty out on the prairies. The largest animals would have been the buffalo or the bison, but elk, antelope, deer, bear, wolves, and coyote would also be seen. Little animals would include prairie dogs. Well, let me get you to the prairie dog first. This is that yellow bush that I had mentioned, and here's some of the blooming of the cactus family. So little animals would include the prairie dog, and I didn't know that I had an antelope in here. He's an antelope. Incidentally, the antelope is very interesting because he is the fastest North American mammal. That animal can hit 50 miles an hour. So let's get to our little animal again. There he is, a prairie dog. And it included raccoons, gophers, possums, and many different kinds of rodents, such as deer mice. Birds would include this western meadowlark. Rewards beyond the dollars could be great on the Santa Fe Trail. You pass through forests in Missouri and eastern Kansas, then tallgrass prairie followed by shortgrass prairie. So I have you in the Flint Hills right now, and I'm going to move you over into some of the shortgrass stuff. This is that same little 40-acre tract that's never known the plow. Then, especially on the Cimarron route, was what was called the Great American Desert. Much of the shortgrass prairie received less than 20 inches of rain a year. This desert took its toll, even to providing mirages. Views of the Santa de Cristo Range and the Spanish Peaks show up over to the west as you proceed to Trinidad, Colorado. Now we're going down now. Here is the border. This is Colorado up here. This is New Mexico down here. This is the Raton Pass. That was the hardest way. We have just come in off of this route and are coming into here. And we will drop down and come over this way and follow it on down that way. And you can see you're looking across shortgrass prairie and you're seeing part of the Rocky Mountains. The Spanish Peaks, those were called. Trinidad, Colorado began as a trail campsite. The river Purgatoire runs through it, so water was available. Two houses in Trinidad are worth seeing. This is Raton Mountain, or Fisher's Peak, from this little town of Trinidad. But the two houses worth seeing, one of them is this one, the Baca House. This was built in 1870, and it was paid for with $7,000 in wool. It saw the final decade of Santa Fe Trail's use. And then right next to it, and still handled by the same people, the Historical Society, is Bloom House. But this was built in 1882 after the trail. But it's next door, it's Victorian, it's really interesting. It was a home of a cattle baron and his wife. Now, driving south from Trinidad to Raton takes you into New Mexico. Interstate 25 is about the only way across Raton Pass into the town of Raton, New Mexico. And I'm up at the pass now on the old road, what's left of the old road. Raton Pass was in the early days the worst place on the mountain route. I'm up high at the pass, and the road was down below. It still is, but the road was down there. But in those days, you had to pull your wagon up on top. The pass has an elevation of 7,834 feet, and it required a very steep pull up combined with a dangerous downgrade. In 1865, Richens Lacey, Uncle Dick Wooten, this man, developed a reasonably good road over the pass. It was a toll road, but it really made the trip easier and faster. By 1876, 15,000 tons were annually moving over his toll road.